In autumn of the year 1087, William the Conqueror's bloated body had burst, and the crown of England went to his son, William Rufus, so called for his reddish blonde hair or his ruddy complexion. Rufus was not the firstborn son of the Conqueror, nor was he the second. The eldest son, Richard, had died in a hunting accident around the year 1070, and the other older brother, Robert Curthose, had simply never been on very good terms with the Conqueror, so he had been passed over for the throne of England, and had instead been granted the Duchy of Normandy. So it was that, in September of 1087, at roughly 27 years old, William Rufus ascended the throne to become King of England. This is the story of King William Rufus. This is the retelling. King William II was not a good king, but nor was he the worst one. He was a brave, courageous warrior and a talented general. Kind and jovial with his inner circle, the king was said to be severe with his subjects, often fixing them with a piercing, powerful glare. He hosted lavish banquets. His court was young, flamboyant, and lively, with fashionable clothes and expensive shoes and stylish hair. Early in his reign, he demonstrated his martial prowess when he quashed a rebellion started by his troublesome uncle, Odo. In the next instant, he demonstrated wisdom and mercy when he spared Odo and instead had him exiled. He then forgave many of the lords who had supported the rebellion. Despite this, William Rufus was far from perfect. Like his father, Rufus would fall into fits of rage. At times he was arrogant, abusive, greedy, wrathful, heavy-handed, and almost always he was unpious. His relationship with the church was about as bad as it could get. Rufus was not a pious man, and his policies as king were largely anti-clerical. He regularly feuded with or insulted the church by seizing or despoiling their lands and stalling the appointment of church offices. Chroniclers of the time, most of whom were themselves offended clergymen, were not kind in their accounts of King William II. They called him ungodly, a waster, and perhaps worst of all for the time, there were even accusations that William was gay. This may have been because at 27 years old, the king was unmarried and he had no children. It was also said, perhaps because of the king's love for fashion, that he encouraged his followers to effeminacy. There may have been some truth in this. The king did have a flamboyant court, and he may indeed have preferred the company of men, but he may also have simply hated the church, and as an unpious, unmarried man, he was branded by church chroniclers with some of the worst accusations of the time. Even respected historians were unkind in their accounts of the king. Take, for example, the writings of William of Malmesbury, a contemporary of King William's who we have encountered before on the channel. In addition to being a prolific historian, Malmesbury was also a monk in the Benedictine order, and thus he held a low opinion of the king. Among his other criticisms, Malmesbury writes, "The king was arrogant beyond measure, and often did things for no good reason, but simply because he possessed great power." Malmesbury had been far more kind in his writings about the previous king, the Conqueror. William the Conqueror, despite his many flaws and his countless sins, had at least been a pious, God-fearing man. William Rufus was not. In any case, the king's relationship with the church was not a good one, and hence many accounts and chronicles from the time are quite unfavorable toward the king. This didn't seem to affect Rufus, however. In the year 1091, he repulsed a Scottish invasion and forced their king, Malcolm III, to pay homage to him. Also in that year, the king continued the war against his older brother, Robert Curthose. The two men were natural rivals, As the conqueror's oldest son, Curthose held a strong claim on the throne of England, and he had powerful supporters on both sides of the Channel. Adding fuel to this conflict was the fact that Rufus and Curthose were heir to each other's lands and titles. If King William Rufus died, Curthose became king. If Curthose died, Rufus got the Duchy of Normandy. If the two brothers needed incentive to make war on each other, which I doubt they did, they now had it. King William Rufus and Duke Robert Curthose waged war on one another, each side occasionally calling on the aid of their younger brother, the shrewd and learned Henry. Prince Henry, called Beauclerc or Good Clerk, had received no lands when his father died, instead receiving a pile of cash. But Henry had something his brothers did not: cunning. He was wise and shrewd. He was happy to support either side of the struggle between his older brothers, so long as in the end his own interests were not in danger. By February of 1096 it was clear that Curthose could not win a war against his brother, and a peace was agreed between the two men. Curthose would surrender the Duchy of Normandy to his brother in exchange for 10,000 silver marks, which was roughly a quarter of the king's revenue. The deal was agreed, and Robert went off on crusade, while King William II added Duke of Normandy to his list of titles. This was an impressive accomplishment. At his birth, William Rufus had been the third-born son of a duke, most likely destined to inherit very little or nothing at all. Now, however, he was not only King of England, but Duke of his ancestral duchy as well. Sadly for King William II, this would be the pinnacle of his successes. He attempted and failed to invade Wales, and at home he continued to feud with the church by constructing castles and halls, but no churches or cathedrals. On the morning of the 2nd of August, 1100, King William II woke from a nightmare. According to legend, in his dream the king had met the devil, who had warned him that they would soon meet again. It might have been an ill omen to some, but Rufus had spat in the face of omens before. That day, he was going hunting. The king's hunting party entered the New Forest under pleasant conditions. It was just the sort of day the king had come to love the most. A bit of sun, a bit of sport, and a good chase in the saddle was a thrilling way to pass the afternoon. In the king's entourage were the regular cluster of servants and attendants, a few of the king's friends, and the king's younger brother, Prince Henry. Laws of the time strictly prohibited anyone poaching in the king's woods, so the game was plentiful. The hunt was on. Setting off into the woods, King William turned to his companion, a knight called Walter Tyrrell, and he handed him a pair of arrows, saying, "Good arrows for a good archer." Walter Tyrrell was known to be a good hunter and a skilled marksman. Taking the arrows, Tyrrell followed after his king. The exact details of what happened next are lost to time. One account says that sometime later, as the king and Walter were making their way through the woods, they suddenly spotted a stag. Reacting quickly and clumsily, Walter Tyrrell drew back the string of his bow and loosed his arrow, letting it fly wildly. Glancing from the side of a tree, the arrow then came to a stop when it punched into the king's chest, either striking him in the heart or through a lung. Whether there is any truth to these details is unknown, but what is certain is that, wounded or dying, King William II was then abandoned by his friends and his courtiers. Just as had been the case when his father, the Conqueror, had died, King William II's body was now abandoned. A king rules in life, not in death. But is there any truth to this account? While it is true that the king was shot and it is true that his body was abandoned, the finer details are still debated. Was it an accident? Was it murder? Was the killer even Walter Tyrrell? Tyrrell was said to be an excellent marksman, so it seems unlikely he would so seriously miss his shot. And if it wasn't an accident, why would Tyrrell murder his king? He had nothing to gain. In fact, he had everything to lose. Walter Tyrrell fled the scene of the crime, going first to France, then on to crusade. While this may be seen as the actions of a guilty man, it may also be the actions of a scapegoat, a man who was framed and who had no choice but to flee. But if Walter Tyrrell didn't have motive to kill the king, then who did? Prince Henry. The prince was with the hunting party, and when he heard of his brother's death, Henry rode hard, not to be by his brother's side, but instead for the kingdom's treasury, located in Winchester. He went straight for the money. Henry was seizing the throne. He knew the power of a king was not in the size of their crown or the seat of their throne. The power was in the money. The man who held the purse was the man who held the power. While Prince Henry could not have personally killed his brother, as he was in a different part of the forest at the time, he could well have had a part in organizing the accident. He had a motive and an opportunity. With the king childless, the heir to the throne was still Robert Curthose, but Curthose was far away on crusade. Robert's supporters tried to stop Prince Henry from seizing the treasury, but their efforts were hopeless. With Robert so far away and with Henry in control of the money, it was clear to all who the next king of England was going to be. In defense of his claim, Henry argued that he was more fit for the throne, as he was the only one of the conqueror's sons who was born of the purple, meaning he had been born into royalty, while his brothers had all been born during their father's reign as duke. Henry had been born to a king. Henry was crowned King of England on Sunday, the 5th of August, 1100, a mere 3 days after his brother's death. Meanwhile, back in the New Forest, King William II's body was eventually recovered by common servants, who loaded his corpse onto a wooden cart and had it brought to Winchester, where it was laid to rest without ceremony. King Henry I would go on to rule England for 35 years, though his reign was not a happy one. He, like his father and brother before him, would be forced to contend with his troublesome brother, Robert Curthose, and his later life would be dominated by tragedy and loss. But that is a story for a different time. Hey, thanks for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did enjoy, please consider leaving a like or comment or subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. I'll see you in the next one.